Hey, yes, it should be, but we'll confirm with Nico.
Hi, Dave.
Okay.
You got in? Can we hear you?
Hey. Dave, we're just going to give people a few minutes to get on.
You made
Now
it.
I'm unmuted,
Hey.
but I can't hear you. But let me check my settings. All different. And there we go. Oh, I hear you. And all right.
Yeah, you can hear us. Good.
Yes.
Little excitement. Couldn't get you in.
Computers. Yeah, we tested yesterday. No trouble at all. Just started right up. And today there were at least 4 different ways that it didn't do that. So
Sounds
I've been
about right.
trying. I've been trying since 20 of.
Ooh.
So do we have a mob in the other room? Oh, we have, let's see, I'm not sure.
Got people dialing in.
Yeah, they're dialing in. Usually we give them till about 5 after or so, or a little after.
Yep, they get lost in the internet.
Hi,
So
Susan.
this is, so what do we have? It's 99 degrees here in Phoenix right now.
Oh, you're in
Holy smokes.
Phoenix. Oh.
It's a cool day. You're not in the triple digits.
I know. Yes, yesterday last night it actually rained. We were at an outdoor restaurant, and all of a sudden there was raindrops blowing in. Crazy.
We've had some crazy weather. I was actually sitting in my hallway the other day because they were talking about tornadoes, and this is in Delaware. And so, I mean, it wasn't expected. And all of a sudden they started announcing, go get to a place of safety. I was like, okay.
Oh, wow. Well, we're going to have a hurricane on Saturday. When are you coming back, Dave?
Tomorrow.
Before the hurricane hits Boston.
Yes. One of the guys here had to leave early today because he has boats in the water in Maine.
Oh, yes.
I definitely want to get those out. How are the leaves up there?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Still green.
I miss more.
Oh,
I
no.
miss that. I miss that so much about New England. If I could like be transported during leaf season and then leave the snow.
I think there are people who do that. The snowbirds.
Yeah, they are most likely retired, or they have tremendously portable careers, but I'm not quite there. Getting close, but not quite there yet. So. Dave, where is home for you?
Nashua, New Hampshire, just outside Boston.
Nice, very nice. We lived in South Hadley. I taught it. I went over the border and taught UConn. My husband taught at Mount Holyoke, and so we were up in the Seven Sisters area for a while there, which is really pretty. And then we've been up and down. We were in the South for too long, and we were in Virginia for 22 years, and now we're up in up in Delaware, which was kind of unexpected part of our adventure, but.
All right. I think, Eileen and Nico, you're my bosses. What do you think we get going?
Yeah, I know a couple other folks are dialing in, but they were going to be late, so we can get kicked off, and people will join.
Yep, and the session is being recorded, so we'll blast it out as well.
Perfect. Okay, well, I have the
So-
pleasure. Oh, did someone say something? Yes, yeah.
One question. We have until the top of the hour, correct, including discussion?
Yes.
Great. Okay, good.
So it's my pleasure to introduce David DeBronkert, known online as ePatient Dave. He's an evangelist, author, and global keynote speaker focused on rethinking the role of engaged patients as empowered partners in all aspects of healthcare. Surviving a near fatal kidney cancer in 2007, by being highly engaged, he co-founded and co-chaired the Society for Participatory Medicine and became a leading voice in Washington for patient access to the medical record, articulating the rationale for patient access and debunking irrational myths propagated by opponents. He has gone on to be the Mayo Clinic's visiting professor in internal medicine in 2015, a member of the British Medical Journal's Patient Advisory Panel and the Open Notes Advisory Board, and a founding co-chair of the HL7 FHIR Patient Empowerment Workgroup. In academic publishing, he has an author's H index of 10, amazing, illustrating the cultural power of his analysis. He has appeared in Time, U.S. News, U.S. Today, Wired, MIT Technology Review, and on the cover of Healthcare IT News and the Australian GP magazine for Good Practice. In 2009, Health Leaders featured him in its cover story, Patient of the Future, and named his doctor and him to their annual list of 20 people who make healthcare better. To emphasize his point on the potential role of patients in transforming healthcare, he notes that his own academic background is nothing but a bachelor's in managerial psychology and a whole lot of lived experience and admiration for how nurses contributed to his survival. Now I'll hand it over to you, Dave. It's really an honor.
Well, thank you. Let's see if we can get this screen sharing thing fired up. Let's see, I need to poke the share button, which is in the top right. Good. And let's see, choose what you want to share. I will. That's interesting. Oh, hang on a second. There we go. And is it working? Are you seeing my slide?
Yes.
We are.
Yes.
See
Looks
you.
great.
Great, because I can't see what's visible out there.
Yeah,
So
that's what
thanks for-
happens with Teams.
It's what, yes, it's what happens with life sometimes. I'll tell you seriously, just to segue into my into the presentation, a whole lot of things are different today from the way they were 5 years ago, and I am keenly aware of how much that affects the lives and the work of nurses. And I'm going to be talking about that. As the introduction said, I am somebody, my life was saved 15 years ago by the best of medicine, and I acutely recall the role that nurses played in my survival. So let's get going, because I want to have time at the end for discussion as well. A little bit of background on how I came to be here. There was some in the introduction that you just heard, but I was a guy who worked in high-tech marketing, zero scientific or medical background. I grew up learning scientific thinking in school, but I've never worked as a researcher, biologist, and so on. I mean, even though I had kidney cancer, to this day, I don't understand what creatinine is, you know? So, but I'm a data geek, right? And I like tech trends and I like automation. In 2007, I discovered I was almost dead and got better in less than a year. True story. You'll hear a short version of that story here. In 2008, I started blogging about this ePatient movement. It's a word that I will define in a moment. And in 2009, a whole bunch of things happened. I discovered, and this may shock you, I discovered there was a lot of garbage in my medical record at the hospital that had saved my life. And I couldn't get a straight answer out of the IT people, so I blogged about it, and I ended up on the front page of the Boston Globe. Completely improbable. Some people have said that if what happened to me was a Hollywood movie script, everyone would say this only happens in Hollywood movies. But there I was. I ended up testifying in Washington for patients' ability to see what's in their medical record. And then people started asking me to give speeches, which I had learned how to do when I worked in marketing. So here we are 15 years later, 14 years later. In 2010, I truly felt a calling. I really wanted to do this. So I left my job and started doing it full time. It was not easy, but in 2011, I did my TED Talk in the Netherlands and started traveling the world. And so here we are, 650 events later. A whole bunch of things have happened. And I'm very pleased to be here. I will tell you, did I just, there we go. I will tell you that a large part of what the benefit of giving all these speeches has been listening to what other speakers said and what the audience people said in response. This good looking doctor here, Tom Ferguson, is the pioneer of the ePatient movement. I never met him, but all these people across the top were his colleagues and friends that he connected with, including the one who's right over his elbow there, is my PCP. That's the fact that my PCP, Dr. Danny Sands, knew Tom Ferguson is part of why I'm alive today, as you'll hear. And he coined this term, ePatients. He said ePatients are like email, the electronic version. They're equipped, engaged, empowered, enabled, all kinds of things. This is Dr. Sands and me. It's a post-publicity photo, but notice how he has the EMR screen turned so that we can both see it. I am passionately opposed to the stinky usability of most EMRs these days. And that's another long story for another day. But if you turn the screen so that the patient can see what's going on, patient or family member, then what's in there becomes a collaboration, which really alters the clinical relationship. Dr. Sands and I were among the community of Tom Ferguson's followers who in 2009 formed this Society for Participatory Medicine. As you heard in the introduction, in 2009, Health Leaders magazine, of all things, got wind of the article and of the society, and they decided to here we are in their 20 People Who Make Healthcare Better annual article. That's Atul Gawande, the guy who writes these incredible books like Surgical Checklists, and then Dean Kamen, inventor of the Segway, but this year he was honored for the robotic limbs his company was making for amputees. Imagine my shock when number 3 on the list was me in a tacky shirt. They had sent a photographer, and I had no idea that this is what they were going to do. But importantly, number 4 on the list was Dr. Sands. Now, we did not have a PR firm managing the visibility of this society. We had no budget. So this was the editors of Health Leaders in 2009 telling their readers that something was going on here. All right. And I started to think, because again, this was when people were starting to ask me to give talks. I thought, am I really an indicator of the future? Because I knew people who had a passion, but they'd gone out of business, being unrealistic. So I thought, well, let's see who's getting online. I've been online since 1989 on CompuServe, back when you had to have a modem on your phone line. And at the time this was happening in 2009, 83% of US adults were online. So, okay, it's like what I was pioneering earlier did happen. But one data point is not a business plan. So I thought, what else have I done in the past that was more popular now? I confess it, romance. In 1999, I met my wife on Match.com, back before it became a place of moral depravity. I'd been in a distance relationship with a woman in Florida, and when that ended, I heard about Match.com, and it was crazy because instead of getting on a plane to go on a date, I would get in my car, if you can imagine that. It's like, anyway, 10 years later, 1 in 8 weddings in the US met online. Today, everybody says, well, yeah, this is obvious. And ladies and gentlemen, that's a big point here. If you live long enough, things change, and things that used to be bizarre and exotic become so routine, nobody even remembers them. I remember the first time I updated this slide in 2011, said 1 in 5 couples met online, and there were gasps in the audience. So fundamental principle number 1, if you live long enough, things change. And I'll tell you, I'm a lot older than I was when I had my cancer, and the world is a very different place. When I had my cancer, the first iPhone had barely been introduced, and now it pretty much runs my life, including my health, as we will see. A brief version of my cancer story. At my annual physical, I had a shoulder complaint, and so the doctor sent me to get a shoulder x-ray. And I will never forget, if you've ever gotten a phone call like this, you'll know what I mean. I remember what my desk at the office looked like, the carpet on the partition, the cubicle partitions, everything. The phone rang exactly at 9 o'clock. It was Dr. Sands. And he said, Dave, the radiologist called me. And I called up the picture on my screen at home. He said, your shoulder's going to be fine, but there's something in your lung that shouldn't be there. And when you hear that, you start, what am I supposed to be? Anyway, he said, I've ordered a CT. We need to find out what it is. The CT showed there were 5 of those, and an ultrasound. This is one of a different one. This is a golf ball sized tumor in the other lung. Ultrasound showed that it was in the kidney, and I went from just feeling kind of tired to metastatic kidney cancer in a day and a half. This is a generic diagram of the reason I'm going through this will be the issue of relating, and I know nurses are great at this, relating to what's in the patient's experience when they're in dreadful trouble is core to what we're going to talk about here. This is a generic diagram of kidney cancer stage 4 from the website of the drug that I eventually got, high-dose interleukin-2. Totally by coincidence, there's that thing in my lung. You can see one in the femur. Turns out I had a big bone met in my left femur. It eventually broke a few months later. There's one that shows a brain met. Mine was actually in the cranium, a bone met near there. And since I've always been an overachiever, I had all these additional tumors all through my body, including, if you look at the head again, just before my treatment started in April, I had one erupt in my tongue. I had kidney cancer growing in my mouth. It was about the size of a pea. I was really sick. As you may know, only the most aggressive cancers will grow in muscle tissue. The doctors correctly said that there was no accurate data on people like me to give me a prognosis. And I know some people don't want to know, but I am a knowledge hound. And I Googled and Googled and Googled, and I went on PubMed, and I finally found a study that said, for somebody with my functional status, my median survival was 24 weeks. And I will tell you that will focus the attention. I no longer had anything else to put my attention on. I remember lying in bed at night thinking, what am I doing sleeping? My life is ending. But that's a subject for another day. We got to work. As soon as the diagnosis was confirmed by a biopsy, remember I said Danny Sands knew those friends of Tom Ferguson? One of them, the guy way over on the left side, was named Gilles Friedman. And back in the 90s, he had started a plain old email group for cancer patients. This acor.org still exists, but the community has moved to a company, smartpatients.com. And I went online and joined this group, and I got phenomenal. Not only did I get the ability to relate with people who are in the same boat as me, but I got a lot of useful knowledge. We will return to this subject of online communities. To make a long story short, surgery and interleukin worked. The surgery was to remove the kidney. All those other metastases did not have to be cut out. When immunotherapy works, it's incredible. All those mets all through my body all shrank. So my lungs were never cut open. And after the treatment ended, so there's that same tumor. In this case, that's 50 weeks later, the tumors just kept shrinking. So I went from almost dead to go out and play. And believe me, I did. It was terrific. Now, little known fact, I'm a hippie from the 60s and 70s. It was in college in Boston during those years. And I like social change. So when the BMJ came to me a few years later and said, Dave, we think your story should be published. Mind you, I didn't submit it. They came to me. I thought, holy crap, this is a chance to reach some medical professionals. So I didn't just publish my story. I asked my oncologist, what would you want other doctors to know about me using the internet? And he said, you were really sick, and I don't know if you could have tolerated enough medicine if you hadn't been so well prepared. What he was talking about was, as it says on the top of this text here, interleukin-2 side effects might kill me. And I asked the care team, what do I do about it? And they said, that's an interesting question. Nobody's ever asked us. So I turned to the patient community and I got advice from 16 people that in the event, 17 people in the event helped me when every side effect hit. Now, here's the question, because I do believe in science. How can it be that the most useful information came from outside the peer-reviewed literature where we are trained to look? And the answer is that knowledge is power, helped save my life, and access to knowledge has changed forever. Now, in the era of GPT-4, this is like, whoa, baby, this is different from it ever was, but that's a subject for later. This principle has been true all along. And I eventually realized that when I'm speaking to an audience of medical professionals, it's useful to use a metaphor that they can relate to. So this social media diagram of all these connections, I realized is very similar to capillaries. So this is like information capillaries. And I vividly remember seeing physicians' heads nodding in audiences at this. Now, today, we got a big problem because if what's flowing through those capillaries is crap in one sense or another, I would say we need some information kidneys to filter out the toxic stuff. And I'll have more to say on that in a moment. There is an aspect of nursing that means so much to me. And in preparing for this call, with Nico and Eileen and the others. I remembered a paper that was published back in 2015 on a phenomenal study that was done, and we'll be distributing the URL to you later. I'll zoom in on the graphic. Don't try to read it too closely. But what they did was they talked to 1,000 patients in 34 different countries, just with open-ended interviews, and they built this taxonomy, this like tree structure of all different sorts of ways that patients experience burden in the course of their disease. Now, this is not the disease itself, but ways that the whole experience is hard. If you look down here, situational factors, one subcategory of that is changing physicians, or if there's pregnancy involved, circumstances at home, which might include following a strict diet when other people are around and complaining about it, and so on. Up at the top, the emotional impact, and something to be particularly aware of is in this one category here. All of those in the green segment are consequences of healthcare tasks that are imposed on the patients, and it's. I find that this diagram, if I'm talking, if another patient has asked me for advice, I find that this diagram helps me have empathy for their situation. Along those lines, and I could talk forever about this, but I want to relate something. In my travels, I discovered this incredible idea. There was an in vitro fertilization program in the Netherlands. They had this crazy idea. They get this. So now this is a long-term patient community because people are there for a long time. They gave them a wiki forum and 6 months to talk. And they said, your top 10 choices, whatever you want, you'll do it. Now, you can imagine that if House MD was on staff, he'd be like, are you nuts? Anything they want? But look at what they, given the chance to consider it, look at what people asked for. The number one thing, of course, was more attempts at fertilization. Technologically, they wanted insurance to cover more attempts. Number two thing was empathy, not just information, but empathy. That's how important this is to somebody whose life is being changed by a medical problem. And the number three thing, still to this day, sometimes brings tears to my eyes: separate waiting rooms for couples who have conceived, so that the ones who haven't conceived yet wouldn't have it in their face. With all the money that we spend on healthcare, right, how much would that cost? And this, I'm getting goosebumps describing this right now. Just the act of understanding what's important to people and caring for them. And this is why I had a realization. I was giving a talk for NC SBN, National Council of State Board of Nursing, and I ad-libbed something that came to my heart. I said, to me, nursing is where science meets caring and touches the patient. And I have personally experienced this. I remember one morning when I was lying in the hospital bed, probably dying, and this nurse practitioner came and stood at the foot of my bed, and I knew she had other patients that she had just been to, and yet she had the ability to just stand there quietly at the foot of my bed and just be with me for a couple of minutes. And then she finally said, "How are you doing?" And we both knew that I might be on my way out, though that's not how it turned out. I give you that from the bottom of my heart, my deepest appreciation. As I say, if you live long enough, things change. Now, the madness that we're going through, all of us today, not just the political and the anti-science insanity, but just the uncertainty of what the heck is going on with AI and large language models. I'll tell you though, well, so here's the trick. My advice to you, what I ask you to consider, this is just a great quote. So we are living through changes that nobody in history has ever been through. And we're figuring out together how to go through it. So this is a quote from Tom Ferguson's computer. He had this app that would just spit out quotes that he liked. In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. And so we can smile or we can, well, anyway, this is why we're here to hack healthcare, right? And come up with a new way to approach everything. Here's how my story worked out for me. This is a photo of me on the night before that shoulder x-ray. This is a guy who was dying of stage 4 kidney cancer and didn't know it yet. At the office Halloween party 10 months later, I was very glad when my treatment was over. Somebody snapped this picture. That's me grinning at the ghoul. And I had pictured my mother's face at my funeral when the disease was new for me, but instead here we were a couple of years later in 2009 when I got to walk my daughter down the aisle, and then she had a baby, and I'm a grandfather now, and hallelujah, and life is wonderful. The work that you do is just terrific, and I'm so grateful. And she is older than she used to be, and that was a day when I was proctoring her on Zoom school during the pandemic, and she's 10 years old now, and she's a gymnastics genius, and OMG. So every one of you, I know there was a moment in your life where you thought, I'm doing well in school. I'm pretty good at science. I could go into medicine. And I thank you for the choices you made and the extra training you got and the work you've done and how much of your heart you've put into it, including the extra battles of the last few years, and for your choice to be here with Nurses Hacking for Health. Thanks so much. And now let's talk.
Thank you, Dave. This was amazing. Does anybody have any questions?
I see Susan has a hand politely raised. I don't
Susan,
know
go
about the
ahead.
others.
Hi, thank you so much for this and also all you do. And I wish that there was some way that you would get paid every time somebody mentioned your name, because I teach I teach informatics 3 times a year, and you're always a big part of several lectures. So I wish there was some way for the money to fall. I was like, there was some. And thank you for what you've done to help us be able to explain to our students the importance of this and putting those pieces together. Now, this group knows me, and I'm always full of questions. I wanted to ask you, when what you went through, it sounded like you did a lot of sifting and sorting, like you were doing natural language processing, but the hard way to get your diagnosis and your medication. Compared to today and the article a couple days ago that talks about, I don't know if you probably have seen it, but this mother has, after 14 years of her child not being cured, or 14 doctors in 4 years, she added in all the things and was able to come up with something that the doctor agreed with. So in thinking about your experience back then to now with tools like this, talk about benefit and then scary things that are related to that.
Benefit and scary things. So
Well,
the short version, and you know, if we were going to be face to face at a conference and we could go to a reception afterward, we could talk about a lot of this. But I'll tell you what's very clear to me. See, the founding document that Tom Ferguson wrote of the ePatient movement lays out how, to simplify it, it's unrealistic to expect anyone to know everything. including the world's best medical professional. But that doesn't mean doctors are always wrong and patients are always right, right? So the underlying reality for people who can cope with the uncertainty is that we're all trying, or should be trying, to figure out what's the best thing to do next, given that we don't know everything. Now, there is a whole separate world here. I mean, I'm fond of saying, I don't need to go to ChatGPT if I break my arm, right? There's no mystery there. But people who have intractable chronic conditions, or the article you mentioned, there was one on the Today Show a couple of days ago with the open spina, or the occult spina bifida, right? And where there's an unsolvable problem. Now, it's hard these days because the people who say, you know, on the one hand, you awaken people's sense of autonomy and responsibility, and they start thinking for themselves. And what if you're an idiot, you know, or what if you just plain disagree? What if you're not an idiot? Those are hard things. But on the other hand, I often draw parallels between the patient empowerment movement and the women's movement that was very active when I was in college. It is learning a new rebalancing relationship. I got to meet Miriam Hawley, who was one of the women who was one of the founders of Our Bodies, Ourselves, the incredibly important women's health book. And she said we weren't getting the answers we needed from the authorities, so we decided to go find them ourselves. Now, there was an article yesterday. My people on LinkedIn are on fire about this. There was an article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal where they sent a rookie reporter who doesn't know the history of health policy to report on the fact that some publicists of the forces of darkness were saying patients are getting scared by seeing their lab tests in the portals. And those of us who fought that war for years in Washington said, number one, well, it's, sorry, I'm going in a bunch of different directions. The reason we fought hard for that is because a study that was replicated twice found that one test result in 14 was never getting delivered to the patient. And there were documented cases of deaths that resulted, pathology results that were never delivered. The real problem is that the mandate comes through, and a lot of us have been preparing ourselves for, okay, we got to do business differently now. You know, patients have got to be told they're going to be getting their lab results. They don't have to look. They can. But the vast majority of clinicians never got the memo about that. And so all of a sudden, horror stories start showing up. It is a few years from now, we will have gotten over the hump. You know, in your own organizations, change management means you got to tell people that things are going to be done differently. And yet somehow that didn't roll out to a lot of people. Another big thing, there is a phenomenal patient activist you can follow on LinkedIn named Grace Cordovano. And she did an impromptu 5-minute video this afternoon on LinkedIn because people were pelting her mailbox. She said, I'm just going to respond to all of you all at once. She said, you know why patients get confused? It's because the way you present the numbers is ugly and unintelligible. And it turns out that a guy did a great TED Talk 10 years ago saying, instead of making this look like a stupid sheet of printed numbers, why don't you make it look like a credit card statement or something where you can tell what's going on? And so I could go on and on. That, you know, when a new group of people gets access to information, at first they're going to be clueless and inexperienced. The remedy is not to keep everybody in the dark, because you know what happens then? Because then clinicians have a reason to say, all my patients are idiots. They don't know anything about this stuff. It's exactly parallel. I actually had an epiphany on this. I had a slide that I didn't use. When my granddaughter was 10 weeks old, she had that beatific first big grin photo in the back seat of the car, in a car seat, facing backwards, being taken where she needed to go. Paternal caring is exactly what you do when somebody has no clue. But it is wrong, as their abilities improve, to keep them in the back seat facing backwards. You manage the transition toward emancipation.
So may I, this is Michael. I
Yes.
greatly enjoyed your talk. It left me both loving what you said and hating what you said. And maybe you can help me reconcile this. I appreciate what you're saying about the value of a knowledgeable patient and about the tools that will help them become engaged and become more knowledgeable and in some ways have a better experience, both in terms of the experience and outcome. But we don't have any technology that does that. The medical record is not designed for patient information, as you just said, nor is it designed for well-being of nurses, nor is it designed for physicians. It is developed as a billing document so that the hospital can bill. The medical record is not designed to make communication easier, be standardized, all the things which would help a patient. And this results in both nurses and doctors spending more face time with the computer than with their patients, a ratio of about 2-to-1. And so how do I cheer you on and join your movement when I see all this junk who is making a relational part of medicine into a transactional one? Could you help me?
First of all, thank you very much for telling the truth. All right, and I've got a number of different observations. The first is it is useful to draw a distinction, which I think you did, between changing the role of the patient and the fact that, if I may be blunt, Epic sucks in usability. All right, and that ain't my fault. And in fact, it infuriates us in the same way that we wanted all the time I was testifying in Washington, working with people on patient access to the medical record. There were two things that were going on throughout that. One was that a lot of people were saying that usability needed to be improved. And I just forgot what the other one, because that was the lobbyists shut that down.
Mm.
They said, no, usability will not be a criterion. And they won. They had more people in the battle than the users. And it's not just the patients. It's now, having said that, I have a hope, and this doesn't invalidate anything you said. I have a hope that, the other thing was that parallels what Grace Cordovano said in response to that Wall Street Journal article. The reason patients are getting confused is because your printouts are ugly, right? What I have a hope that what we're going to see is people taking that data and making prettier sheets out of it in new apps. Now, I know that will help people on the patient side of things. Ideally, it will be better screens that will be added to Epic now that they run the whole world, at least in the US. It's a transition period. I know what the other thing was. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept of scribes. My eye doctor, which is at Mass General Brigham, they use scribes, and so does my other eye doctor in my small town practice. And I think that's, I love that it frees the doctor up to be talking to me and looking at me. I know it increases costs, but I haven't found anything that succeeds in stopping costs from going up. And I think we need to be focusing on, frankly, the mental health of the people doing the work. You know, because I don't want them to hate their job. I don't want them to quit. I don't want them to be stressed. So I'm really in favor of scribes. I've personally seen how it solves the problem. Now, maybe, who knows? Some people are saying that 3 years from now, ChatGPT will be the scribe or something better. I don't know. It's interesting. A lot of people worry correctly. I've never seen transcription software that was really good quality. You know, a retired doctor friend who died recently, for years had a collection of things that he referred to as dragon droppings. You know, mistakes that it made. But on the other hand, you may have heard of the Open Notes project, which is where patients get to look at the visit notes. Oh my goodness, my doctor puts in a whole lot of typos and mistakes. I mean, material errors. So once you see that, you can say, all right, so we've got this problem under the time pressure of an insurance time-limited visit, right? Then nobody wants to pay for somebody to go back and proofread and fix typos. So we've got to somehow or other get to the best feasible visit notes that will serve the purpose of moving the case forward. I believe in working together to do that. One thing for certain, I'm pleased. I know, so the skeptics, the anti-patient access forces have said, my patients never look at their notes. They don't care about it. And the fact that something is not being adopted is valid and legitimate. But for the people who do want to do it, number one, for the people who do want to do it and know what's going on, I mean, it's already been documented. There are 3 different papers on opennotes.org where patients who do read their notes have better adherence to the treatment plan. You know, because guess what? A lot of people don't remember what was said during the visit. That's why you publish minutes of meetings, right? So people can go back and look. But we've got to, and younger people in my daughter's generation and the generation coming after her are more inclined to do that. And I find also that parents, caregivers, whether it's a parent caring for their kids or a sandwich generation adult caring for an elder, are more likely to check carefully for those things. And I want to give you one tiny example of why patient access is so important. A couple years before she died, my mother got a new eye doctor because the previous one retired. That's one thing, rough thing about getting to be 80 years old is the doctors who used to be older than you retire, right? And you got to start out with the young pups. Anyway, she went to this new one and they didn't have computerized medical records, so her history couldn't get imported. We're working on fixing that. But in the process of doing the intake interview, she filled out the stupid clipboard again. And anyway, when she got back to her PCP, a couple of weeks later, he said, "Oh, you have diabetes?" And it turns out, and she said, "Not that I know of." And it turns out that the clerk doing the intake at the eye doctor's office saw that she was on gabapentin, which usually is used for type 2 diabetes, but not for her, and had just decided to write down diabetes as a diagnosis. Humans are going to make mistakes, and some humans are smarter than others, and some are dumber than others. If we can approach it as let's try to work together with our clunky systems, that's one of the key things about participatory medicine is let's work together. And I will say, nobody gets to be a patient wanting to do participatory medicine if they're going to yell at their doctors and nurses. Right? Because the whole idea is to work together.
I love the points you're making. It needs to be collaborative and you need to work together. I had the experience of our nurses used to do the medical history for the patient, and we always had them turn the computer to the patient and do it together.
Oh, good. Good.
But what happened?
Yeah.
But what happened was they did receive their labs before we even saw them. And this happened to be in a high-risk obstetrical practice. We didn't have time to speak to the patient. So what is normal during pregnancy looked abnormal. And so, of course, the poor patients were all anxious, crying, calling the practice. It was really a mess. But then we learned very quickly to really communicate when they were there. Look, you're going to see your labs. This is an obstetrical thing, and then it got so much better. But you're right. If you're not preparing, you're not able to speak to the patients, communicate, and all of that just causes more issues.
I wish it could be. I wish it could all be more orderly.
Yeah.
I want to mention something. I know we've got a few minutes left. If somebody has a question, by all means ask it. But I'm really excited by some new things that are starting to happen with digital health. And somebody will always listen to me talk about this stuff and say, "Well, you're just weird. You're a nerd." Right? Well, that's what they always say about the pioneers. Okay. Two things. First of all, 3 years ago, I had cataract surgery on both eyes. One eye was fine. The second one had an accident. And to make a long story short, I ended up with glaucoma in my left eye. And I've lost 30% of the optic nerve in that eye. It's stable now. But consider this. Glaucoma is actually a family I learned from a patient community, not from the information on the Mass General OCD website. 36 different diseases, each of which ends up killing part of the optic nerve, but it's managed using eye drops and eye pressure checks. Okay, that's the only way to do it. Now, if you've ever had your eyes checked, you go into the doctor's office and they do a puff of air on the eye, and the instrument reads the pressure coming back off of it. You get to do that about once a month or however often you visit, which makes just as much sense as if a person with type 1 diabetes checks their glucose about once a month. So from the patient group, I learned about this handheld machine, which has a little probe in it. I hold it up to my eye and it goes flick, 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 flick. And as many times a day as I want, I can check the pressure. So when we change my eye drops, instead of coming back a month later, right, I can tell if the drops are working or not. Here's the thing. I now have more information about my intraocular pressure than my doctors do. Right? And it's a good thing for me. Well, it's a good thing for them actually that they welcome it, right? And I took it in and they compared it with their Goldman tonometer and blah, blah, blah. The other thing that happened is after a long plane flight in January and then a meeting that I attended, I ended up with COVID, and it wasn't a very bad case. But then a few weeks later, I discovered, I was just wandering around in my iPhone in the health app, and they have a thing called cardio fitness. And if you know the exercise physiology, it's a measure of VO2 max, how well your body can get oxygen out of your blood vessels. Well, I don't know if you can see it, but look what happened to my VO2 max during the week I had COVID. It plunged. And I've been slowly recovering. It's somewhat better than it was, but essentially I have a problem with it. It's endotheliitis, inflammation of the blood vessel lining. Number one, my doctor had no idea that I had this problem, right? Number two, what you do about this, when I first presented this to him, wasn't in the literature yet. Right. So even when he went and talked to his Harvard affiliated physician community. So once again, because of this digital health stuff, I have information that he doesn't have access to. And so you can imagine the world where I'm envisioning, and that's why I'm at a conference working on health data standards right now in Phoenix. The world I can envision is one where it's almost like you've got the information that he's getting from his EMR, and you've also got the information from my world. And at first it will be a flood of too much information to make sense of. And then we will, over time, figure out what stuff deserves our attention. And that reminds me, just to wrap myself up here, when I was 8 years old, I read a book on the history of flight from Reader's Digest or something. And there was a period of time where, as planes got fancier and faster, they thought that the pilots needed more and more information. And they brought more and more dials to the cockpit. And it got to the point where the number of crashes increased because the pilots were overloaded with information and didn't have time. And that was when they realized that the precious commodity was not the information, it was the attention of the professional who was flying the plane or managing the case. And that was the birth of the idea of a dashboard, either designed on a plane or a car or in software, something that would bring the most important information to your attention. And as we get more and more facts brought into systems for our case, the goal we're headed for is more attention. And you can believe, you bet I want to see it all too, at the same time my doctor is. All right. This is going to affect reimbursement, because in my view, people say, well, wait a minute, I've got all these portal emails I have to deal with. I hate the fact that clinicians right now are being forced to deal with these things after hours, so-called pajama time, without reimbursement. The thing that I like most about this is a proposal that a doctor in Colorado on Twitter was saying, what we're doing is, if it's a topic that doesn't require my license, somebody with a lower license or a clerk will handle it. If it does require my license, we treat it as a micro visit and it's billable. And that's fair to me, you know, if they're using their training. But now it'll take several years for insurance to catch up with it. So all this new crap, why can't we go back to, oh, well, I remember when the stethoscope was new, right? And the first book that mentioned the stethoscope said, we doubt that this will get much acceptance because it's just not how we do things. But then in the second edition, they changed that, they removed that. Someday about fire. Well, I'm here at the fire conference, Fire Technical Working Group. I know we're at time. Anybody who wants to stick around for a few more minutes, I'm happy to keep going. But
I would love to stick around if we're allowed to. Yeah. Are we allowed to stick around for a little while? Okay. My issue, I'm a primary care provider, and my problem is, you know, in the olden day, people would run down the hall with their, you know, all their data on their paper that they had been recording studiously. Now they bring it in with their iPhone or their, you know, different kinds of technology. And we theoretically should be able to have something, an application for fire that allows them to download their data to us, and we could incorporate it in the record. Most practitioners, especially primary care practitioners, are so far away from that. And I didn't know what your thoughts were about that.
The great bottleneck right now is the absence of software to bring this stuff together. What I've heard people do most often is they will literally print it. Excuse me, if they get a page of information, they'll print it and scan it, you know, as if it was a fax. But believe me, the work that we were doing in that January meeting where I got COVID, and 3 times a year we get together and we work continuously between meetings also. So the work is underway. The way to think of it, for those who don't know, FHIR, F-H-I-R, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, is the new web language for moving health data between computers. All right, and as of last year, as of the end of last year, it was mandated that anybody who wants to get paid by CMS has to have FHIR in their EMR, so that other people with the right authorizations can get the data out. But the fact that, this is exactly analogous to the birth of the web in the mid-90s, it opens up enormous new potential, but it will be a while before it changes how we actually do things. And I could go on at great length about that. But you know, one key thing there for those who are interested in that, in the early days of the web, there's this software concept called the single source of truth. Where do you get the one correct answer to a particular question? An example that bit me more than once is a particular seat available on a plane flight? Now, the ticket sales computer that my browser was talking to might be out of sync with the actual seat inventory computer. And so we had to go through 1 or 2 generations of replacing every system, every computer in the pipeline, until today, everything from the ground up is built on what's the single source of truth, and everything grows from that. And we will have disconnects like that between EMRs and apps and government databases and everything until that matures. But to directly answer your question, FHIR is the standard that will make that possible over time. And there's a lot of work to be done between now and then, and it's underway. By the way, there are a lot of physicians who have gotten involved, because in the same way, some of us patients want to be sure that it's all done the way we want it. there are a lot of physicians who want to be sure it's done the way they want it too. So if you've got any computer nerd colleagues, you can, it doesn't cost anything. You don't have to join. You can be a fully participating member. The only thing that requires a membership is if you want to vote on specifications.
I'm at
Or
a
go to
university.
meetings.
I'm at a university. I live with nerds.
Well, good.
Good.
I
Well,
have
thank you.
learned so
That makes
much
me
from you.
that makes me
Thank
feel a lot
you.
better because I had this vision of the CMS people were going to pull up and take me away. I say irons or stripes, which would no, but I mean that they have really threatened us not because I was one of those weirdos that read the whole 1,500 pages when 21st Century first came out, and I kept looking and
Wow.
say, we're not going to be able to do this quickly. What are we going to do? How are we going to be able to do this? I know my organization isn't sophisticated enough to do this quickly, and so where will we be? So again, it's good to hear that others are also experiencing this, but we're just not there in my university and
Well,
in my practice.
there are separate regulations for what the practice has to do and
Yeah.
what the vendor has to do.
Right.
No, so Epic, Cerner, Meditech, they all have to offer a FHIR connector,
Yes.
a so-called FHIR endpoint that you can use and other people can use.
Super. Well,
So-
it's good to hear that others are still working on it. Thank you so much for the time. I'm sorry if others have questions.
Sure.
I think we're
Anybody
good.
else? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. That was
Thank you,
so
Dave,
informative.
so
You were
much.
amazing. You are just amazing. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing your story and a lot of information. It just
You
it's
had
taking
me in
notes.
tears too.
And thank you for so much
Well,
you're doing all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
you've
Thank you.
certainly, you've just the sharing that you do and the way that you make it so relatable is just fantastic. So thank you again
well,
for helping us.
thanks. I'm getting the
Thank you
Phoenix
very
sunlight
much.
coming in the window here. So, well, and thank you folks for spreading the word, because that's what evangelists like, right?
That's right.
Somebody once asked if they had permission to use one of my blog posts. And I said, I don't know if you ever read the Bible, but Jesus didn't go around saying that, watch out, got to talk to my IP people. Okay.
Thank you.
so
Good
much,
night.
Dave. Have
Bye.
fun in
Okay.
Arizona. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, and I hope something good. Let me know what comes out of the event next weekend, huh?
Yes,
will.
for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.